Welcome to Challenging Paradigm X. How can we understand consciousness and the nature of reality from the scientific and spiritual perspective? Do we need science to become more holistic? And are competition and cooperation opposites? My guest today is Daniel Dick. He has a background in system science, consciousness research, anthropology, holistic medicine, sexual pedagogy, and consultancy and management. He is driven by his curiosity and extensively traveled to explore various cultures, different spiritual paths, and holistic healing techniques, as well as altered states of consciousness, to make sense about experiences and human life. He helps others to move to a meaningful and healthy co-creation, and he organized several conferences and symposia around his topics. He's also a co-author of the book Sex, Masculinity and God. So, if you're interested to find out more about his understanding of consciousness from a scientific and spiritual perspective, stay tuned. Hello, Daniel. I'm happy to have you here at my podcast. Please introduce yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Hi, nice to see you again. My name is Daniel Dick. I have different facets. Right now, I'm in a Buddhist center practicing Tibetan Buddhism. That's my main thing here in COVID times. Was the best thing to really go into retreat and go inside and having spent much time in the garden. And meanwhile, also working on some publications, some projects to finish. So I've been author. Before coming here, I was much more into organizing institutions around consciousness studies. And I co-founded 2 institutions around consciousness studies. And I have been mainly also in system science. So my past has been very much the academic career, trying to combine, on one hand, consciousness, spirituality, knowledge about the mind, about how does the world actually work if we really see them as something that we are able to get to know. So that was my academic path, coming from social and cultural anthropology, always focusing religion and consciousness studies. And I like actually doing photography, but that's only on the side. This has been my main endeavor. I have been also a bit in consulting, also a bit into horoscopy, especially the Mayan system. I'm very enthusiastic about the Mayan calendar and teach some people about that. And privately, I also have been always kind of involved into healing arts, like holistic healing arts, and trying also to combine this with the science that I had. I wanted to do a PhD about that, but actually never worked out. It was better like that. And this makes big convolution about learning from cultures, because that's more the former background about cultural social anthropology. My parents are from Chile, I'm from Germany, and I love travel always. And to learn from different cultures, always asking the question, what is in common to different religions? Why do people in South America have mermaids too, and talk about things that I thought this would only happen in European fairy tales, or different stories about how the world works together, and seeing that in different parts of the world they're coming to similar conclusions. It was my interest to get this together in my mind, together with my experiences, and have been also involving psychedelics, especially in South America, medicine plants, and making my mind out of what life is and what we're doing here, and what's the best thing to do moving forward to trying to be a good human somehow. And I have no family. I have my family as my brother and my mom and my friends, and so relationships itself has shaped also my way very deeply, because the questions about meaning of life was always kind of related to love in the sense, and what is human love, what is the spiritual love that has no boundaries or no exclusivity. So that was some guiding questions of my life, Why does love has to be like exclusive if you love someone? You know, why you can't love someone else? And then comes jealousy and anger and feelings of that you can't do something, or what is freedom to love or not. So those are kind of inspired a bit of the good old tippies.
And
Yeah.
why do you do what you do?
Oh, I kind of had like a cut with academia, with scientific exploration, because it had kind of some limits for what I was searching for. In the past, I was very much into science and getting knowledge about consciousness studies, which gave me like a lot of information how my mind actually works, and therefore you're constantly involved with your mind, with your consciousness, examining what the consciousness does. So it's a very close loop and gives you a lot of concepts, which actually also gets into a lot of projections, because you see your mind and your mind is what you perceive. You know? And especially if you go into symbology, archetypes and stuff like that, it becomes very interesting to see how different shapes, as I said, come together from different cultures. Different patterns always repeat in different stories and stuff. So my main interest was really like this curiosity about how the world works. And therefore I was doing like science. And in the past, I mean, I can go even far back because one event in my life was very hard and shaped my life very deeply, because my father committed suicide when I was 14. And then it was like a lot of survival mode. I became like the father role in the family because I was the older one. Just from one day to the other, I was adult. So my mom wouldn't ask me anymore when to come home. So I was 14 and I was fully responsible for my life. And then the question was so into the face, what's life? What's the meaning of life? If your father commits suicide and you ask yourself, like, really, what the hell are you doing here? You know? And in psychology, in Jungian psychology, it's said that these questions usually come when you really are about to die, after you pass the 50s and so on, and you ask yourself, oh my God, what did I do with my life? So these questions came for me when I was 14. And that was like the interest into philosophy. And because of my mom and also my dad, I was always interested into holistic healing methods. That was my father's side. And my mom had always like a spiritual connection, to say, like very special dreams and stuff like that. And after I did my school, I went to South America, really with this wish to explore this meaning of life. So visit the shamans and purifications and learned about Reiki, like healing arts with hands and energy, which open up a huge dimension of perception and of beings, which to that time was like experience. But I couldn't make my mind out of it, like really understand this in a coherent worldview. These experiences have been like very deeply also shaping my life in various ways, because they are till now shaping very much on what I rediscovering now also from the Buddhist knowledge. So on one hand, the death of my father and the reflection about death and the meaning of life put me on a track to ask philosophy, spirituality and stuff like that about this meaning of life, which led me to a lot of experiences. And that experiences I couldn't explain myself. And then I went studying. Actually, I wanted to do photography and traveling around. And that's why I thought anthropology would be nice. But there was this professor that was teaching consciousness and religion studies. And I was like, wow, that's my thing. There I have my answers. And so I started under him, became his tutor and he my mentor. But then he died 2013 from cancer. And after the 3 months after that, the skeptics came. Like it's like a self-named police against bad scientific behavior, you could say, because some of the students did really not a good job on their thesis, but they just want to have a safe worldview that everything is just material and everything has a cause and effect. So there was an article in the news that was defamating very much his work or the fellowship that he created. And that led me to study materialistic worldview, which in turn led me to ask about the philosophy of science. How do you actually get to know what you know? That was in the thesis. And this led me to system science. System science led me back to consciousness. And actually going through these founding institutions of consciousness studies, discovering myself again, that actually like the deep longing was actually going back more to spirituality. So, but 2 years ago, I had a very deep cut also of my life, which kind of very provocative, put like this cut, which catapulted me in various ways to say, okay, I'll stop. I won't do this work anymore. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I'm just noticing that I forgot very much about myself because I became like very ambitious on the career of being someone important, flying around and doing conferences and stuff like that. And yeah, the last year I was also together with a girl that was American, and we got together a job to open up a holistic healing center in Germany. And she was from America. That was also the way we could stay together. And then came COVID, and the relationship didn't work out. And then I said, okay, what shall I do? And it is a very old wish that I had to go like to a monastery or something like that. I was always like, I once have to do this. I don't know, like a deep sense of very often telling like my girlfriends, like, you know, at some point I will have to go to the spiritual path, you know. I don't know. I always had this in my mind that I had to do this. So, and now I'm in a Buddhist center. I'm finding doing that. And feels very much at home, sometimes a bit impatience because it's a lot of discipline. But it's also in Europe, so it's also very nice to that you don't have this harsh discipline as you would have in India or Nepal, stuff like that. And having COVID passed in here was also a very nice ambience. And meanwhile, I also wrote a book, yeah, with two other guys about sex, masculinity, and God, which is tackling actually in a conversation very much this question about the exclusivity of love, the sexual drive, like the very unconsciousness doing around mating, relationships, but also what does it do with ethics? You know, if you're true to yourself because you're feeling for someone else, but you're in a relationship, what does it mean? To very philosophical questions to like, what has love and death actually in common? It was a very deep investigation. And out of one of the institutions that I've co-founded, the Academy on Consciousness Research of Vienna, there's still a book to be finished. It took me a while, but we are now in a very good run that it could really finish. There were, I think, 12 people involved in that. I'm very happy to be able to present these findings in a proper way. Unfortunately, it will be in German. The other one is in English. Yeah.
You've talked about having gone into consciousness science from different perspectives. So, what's your conclusion thus far? Like, what's the essence of what your conclusion is at the moment?
I think the best way I could summarize that is actually in Nietzsche's words. Nietzsche wrote like the three metamorphoses of the mind, where he said, like in the beginning, the mind is like a camel. It takes like all the heavy load, and the more you thrive to know something, you know, you take the burdens to go into the desert, and you have patience, and you carry heavy load, and you go on. Maybe in a caravan, you have some companions that you go with, and you make it like from one oasis to the other to really get this thirst stilled. And the second turning is to become a lion. The lion is the one that doesn't ask anymore, what should I, but turns the values around and say, what do I want? He becomes like the power, the the king of the desert. And he is the one that creates the values while he's fighting the dragon that has on his skin all the values written in. And then he asks about what is the third change of mind? What is the third metamorphosis that the mind can do? And it is the child to say yes to life and to look at it openly as every day new, as you would know nothing again. And the summarizes very much, I could also tell like the story of one professor that was studying an island, a very, very tiny island. And he said to me, when I wrote my PhD thesis about this island, I knew exactly how this island worked. He was an anthropologist and asked everyone and checked into economy, politics, religion, and stuff like that. And he said, after 10 years, I was like, yeah, I didn't really get what's happening there. And now I'm studying this island about 40 years. I have no idea.
Okay. So is that how you feel about consciousness?
You can say a lot about first perception. You have your senses, and out of your senses, you make a distinction to say, oh, that's something. In that moment, you have like a second level that creates time, because you got a friction of a moment that you realize that is something to a moment which is not. And that what is something is usually charged with emotion, with judgment. To say, it's even a judgment to say, this is a laptop, and you might even have a heavy charged, emotionally charged perception and say, wow, that's a very beautiful laptop, or it's even my laptop, So this is like the first notion where we create meaning. And if we repeatedly have this notion of time that we put together, that we have experienced something before and judged this is that, then we have something that creates the world of ideas, I would say it simply, because we have words, Suddenly you know what a laptop is without knowing how my laptop is looking like, because you have seen a lot of laptops, and each time frame that you recognized and said, this is a laptop, you would now have an image that what a laptop is. And this creates consciousness around things that are not actually in time and place of your senses, which is a very interesting consciousness itself. And then we have like the next notion where we put all these ideas together into a proximity. We can say what a laptop is. There's usually the table. To the table, there's like the floor, and to the floor, there are like the walls. Around the walls is the house. So everything is kind of next to each other, and we put like system of thoughts together. And this system of thoughts can be also around science, where we say we have these rules among the words that we have, and the things that are close to each other make a set of rules so that this conglomerate of ideas stay together. And that's how religion works. That's how companies work. That's how they always put like a boundary around a proximity that is one and localized, but extends over time and space through the ideas. And in this level, we have like various levels. One is like, very short in time, and the other ones are very long in time. And they can be that long that are close to infinity. And this is when we come to a symbolic order of the universe. In an archetypal and symbolic meaning, things repeat each other in different notions of time and patterns throughout the creation of the ideas, which are reflected in our minds, and interestingly enough, through all times that had the capacity of building up a civilization to project us. Yeah. And beyond beyond that, there is not much more either when you really are trying to unfold different and here even words are very difficult because you're already in symbolic order, which on one hand has to be also sound, has to be also color, has to be also movement, has to be also shape, has to be also understood not from a conceptual framework of knowing what it is, but also having on one hand the system of thought, but at the same time no concept of feeling, to be able to feel without a concept, but having the system of thoughts in mind. And this is a very interesting theory. Yeah. And beyond that, there is the mind that is able to embrace all of that, where there is just nothingness. There are two kinds of nothingness. One nothingness that is like the dark void. It's like shit. There's really nothing. You know, it's a very uncomfortable place to be, and there is the void that it's actually not nothing like of a shitty place, but actually a very beautiful place because it is filled with compassion. So this nothingness is just always described as a pure light or as God or as emptiness and compassion at the same time for the Buddhist or as the blissful being, you know. And there's the question as to how much, like how clear that is. In between is also just the experience of light itself, like in its colors. But there is also beyond the colors one fear that is, you could say, without color. You know, if you have like a prism which divides all the colors, you just go behind that. You know, we always see colors. You know, we don't see light. It's not something that you can perceive. It's something that is all the time, but it's beyond the veil. You know, it's beyond this prism that spreads out the light in its spectrum.
So basically, this is a Buddhist concept that you were talking about, mostly, the way I understand.
It's not only Buddhist. It was also highly influenced from system science. I mean, they come very close to Buddhist and the scientists. That's why they are very friend to each other. But at the end, if you take like the Gnostic or any symbolic order, you know, like Freemasonry or others, I mean, that's what the most know. But there's the Hinduist culture is also very rich on that. But also, if you go to the Andean cosmology, you can go into that. They don't have much the notion about these ultimate stages, but actually they have some of them, but it's not very much recorded. You also have this in Native American traditions. If you talk about the Great Mystery and the Great Father and stuff like that, Great Mystery is like also this void where there's nothing but everything comes out of it. And the different notions, but the importance always in these traditions are really like this, the heart level, you know, to not go into a dark voidness, but into a light voidness where you can hold and you want to contribute to the life giving forces. And even though things die, but to the cycles itself. Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
just for those listeners who don't know anything about these things, we're basically talking about the nature of reality, at least from different traditions than the classical Western tradition. Let's put it that way. And it has a different perspective on the nature of reality. So than what we are used to in the West, at least. Just to sum it
Yeah.
up in a way.
I mean, to give it up also some scientific background. I mean, because one major question right now is like this quantum physics. You know, when I was in this other institute, there was a lot about convergence, about quantum physics and psychology, that you can't distinguish the observer from the observed. They have an effect to each other because the experiment always changes if someone looks at it. So then the hard materialists have to look into the psychologists because there's something going on with the mind. And the second thing that led to this question is actually coming from system science. And here I have to point out Luhmann on the first hand, but also George Spencer Brown. And they have taking up like the key formations for this kind of thinking. But also, if you look into Kant, he at the end he said, "Well, what you know is what you are, but actually, it's more about what you imagine that becomes like more important at the end." And I mean, from a very down to earth perspective, to bring it down to earth, we always think that things are very separate from ourselves, and that things doesn't have much influence on how we feel and what we do and what we think. But there are some proofs also from science that are doing like this research on how you change water molecules or with your emotionality and your wording, or how you change random generators like machines that to random numbers, and put an intention, you change the randomness. So some intention is there in the mind that has influence even on machines. And if you think about your mom, and she calls you, these are like small things where love shows a connection that is very visible. So these are only some hints, but you can always ask yourself, like, if you dream, which eyes are seeing what you see? You know, you have a dream, you see things. What are the eyes that are looking these dreams? Yeah.
I'm really interested in the book you wrote. Could you elaborate a bit on that? It's what is it called? Sex, Masculinity, and God?
Sex, Masculinity, and God. Exactly. The book was first introduced by Cadell Last as an idea to me because I met him and we talked about his philosopher, and he talked about like what's the real in philosophy. We're getting all these ideas. We talk all the time about these ideas in philosophy, but what's the real? Where we can base a philosophy in the real, and there's nothing more
May I ask you, do you mean reality, or what do you mean by the real?
by the real, because philosophers, for example, they think about thinking and how thinking works with the thinking and thinking. So they get like into a loop where the world of ideas is explored, but when it comes to daily life, then we get into trouble, because we have relationships, because we have feelings and stuff like that. So his question was very much about how can we put philosophy back down to earth, to what matters to the people, not about some elitary thinking about, where it doesn't really matter to everyday life, where are the people, what's really matter, and what everybody is kind of involved into is sex, sex and food maybe, and sleeping, that's some basic needs. But actually, almost nobody talks in philosophy about sex. And this is something really, I mean, why? Almost no big philosopher talks about sex. But then psychoanalysts, we had Freud, we had Jung, and stuff like that. And from this discussion, he said he's going to invite a third person. That is Kevin Orrell, and he's coaches for masculinity, and is very much popular about really empowering men in their masculinity, because we also got like the feeling that, especially in the academic sphere, that you're not allowed to be a man really anymore, because there was a lot of awareness about rapist culture. So the book actually is setting up the question about attraction, and it's like a bit of the lock of orientation of temporary masculinity, and goes is actually in a deep dive about psychological development that comes out of the direction that gives you unconsciousness, and the deepest desires that are leading actually the unconsciousness and your movement through the world. And how does it relate to ethics? How does it relate to archetypes of different cultures? How does it relate to the absolute truth, to the absolute love and the relative one? How do we really find each other in relationship to, how can we be true to ourselves? What is truth at all? And it describes a bit of this path that you go through a desire, through a learning process to uncover what has been unconscious to the consciousness. And very up down to earth through the question about what is sex, what is death, what is love, what is ethics, what is real. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was the short attempt to really make a conversation out of like amongst kind of last Kevin Oros and me to have like this trialogues, we call that, to uncover like what really matters, relationship, loves, our desires for the other half, to say. So what's happening if there is no half anymore?
And the book has been written by the three of you, or is it one of you has written it and it was created out of these conversations that you had? How was it?
It started through online conversations that has been streamed on Facebook, on YouTube, and that was transcribed and re-edited. And we had then a second row where we had like 10 of these episodes again to revisit these 10 chapters, these 10 episodes, and is now in the process to be re-edited as the second edition of the book. Additionally to the 10 chapters that we had before, it's coming like a redefined version with now interesting 3 years for the three of us, going through a lot of processes emotionally, also on the personal side and intellectually. That was like a very wonderful journey to have a ride with these gentlemen, Karalas and Kevin Oros. Also giving a workshop and a talk on the European Men's Gathering this summer in Denmark. And it will be very interesting to see. And we got a really good feedback so far from people. So we'll see.
And so, please tell me, what paradigms do you think need to be challenged in a world today when it comes to consciousness or anything else that is related to what you work on?
I mean, the first thing that has to really be changed in the mind of the people is that we depend on each other. We're like the nature. If you put something out, the next to it will also die. So you can't survive if you just want to survive for yourself. You always have to make the whole thing be able to survive. So the very first change of mind has to happen, I think, in science, to not see things as separate and not investigating them separately. I mean, there's a very good approach to see how things function, because you put something out, it's like your body. You know why you have a leg to the point where you're really noticing it. It's when it hurts or when you don't have it anymore. Then you have the appreciation. That's usually like science works, that you put just a piece out, but actually you examine the piece and not the whole thing, So how this whole body works is very complicated, and you have to take the piece out, but don't look the piece that you took out. Look the thing that is the whole thing. And this relates to the human body, so we need holistic medicine. It relates to our ecology, our relationship to ecology and nature, and also how we are together as a community, as a social being, and all the political system that comes behind that. Next thing that has to be changed is really to make an education that allows people to grow for, on one hand, for compassion and for freedom. We don't learn among these values anymore. We learn how to be better and competitive, and hopefully to be better as your neighbor, which doesn't make any sense. We need much more cooperation to be better. That's how civilizations grow, and as we grow. We need competition to re-examine ourselves and to position ourselves among each other. What are my talents? But the school system, how it's working right now, is like you're making like a machine of a copy that everybody has to do the same, and that's not worthy. We need people that expresses individual talents. And for that, some kind of competition as well. But actually, the competition should be around who does the better cooperation. I mean, this goes also to religion or science or whatever. I think there's so much knowledge that we can grasp also from our internet that we don't need to learn so many things by heart in our brain. We have to learn much more about our emotions, about how to use our mind properly, not only learning by repeating things, but how to get inside, how to have a perception, how to, and this is also very much to actually Hinduistic yogic tradition, like to master really the body. This is actually something that is very much needed in the West as well as in the East. It's much needed to have technology and proper discipline on a technological side and organizational side to allow social beings, social security, stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, the paradigm is from the small, that's me and that's and I need this, to how can we make this together? There's no other way to make it together. Even scientifically, doesn't make any sense. And all spiritual traditions are talking about this. But the narrow scientific mind to separate all things is just, it doesn't lead to anywhere. Just putting things apart, and not finding anything in putting things apart.
If you imagine 100 years from now, when people look back and think of you, your grandchildren, for example, what do you want to be remembered for?
Good question. For my grandchildren, I wish that I would tell them good stories that inspire. Yeah, I think I had a granddad that told me a lot of good values and great stories. I hope to follow this example, to be at least for my grandchildren. Love to have stories. To be a granddad that really has time for them, that can teach them about life lessons, give them some directions, so that they might remember me as someone that, like a role model. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking your time and being here. And I wish you a great day.
Thank you.
So
thank you.
Farewell for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for staying tuned for this edition of Challenging Paradigm X. If you like this episode with Daniel Dick, feel free to share it with your community so Daniel's message gets spread even further. In the show notes, you will find the links to Daniel's work. Please hit subscribe and rate my podcast if you liked it. I'd also be glad if you write me a review. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact me. Next week, we are up with the next edition of Challenging Paradigm X. Until then, I wish you a great week.